On May 18, 2009, the quiet stillness of a small town in Ohio was violently shattered. Hidden among the whispering trees and white picket fences, inside a seemingly ordinary suburban home, police made a grisly discovery that would send shockwaves through the entire community. Blood. Lots of it, splattered across the kitchen tiles, smeared across the floorboards. And in the center of it all, the lifeless body of Robert Johnson, a 76-year-old grandfather, lying cold and still in a pool of crimson. The murder weapon, still lodged in his chest. What made this tragedy even more horrifying wasn't just the brutality of the act, but who the alleged killer was. This wasn't the work of a stranger. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't some random break-in or home invasion. No, the events that led to Robert's death had been brewing in the shadows for months, and they stemmed from something far darker, far more twisted. A forbidden relationship, a secret affair, and a betrayal so vile it would tear a family apart forever. It began with Ethan Johnson, a 22-year-old college student, smart, driven, full of promise, and deeply in love with his longtime girlfriend, 21-year-old Tiffany Harper. On the surface, they were the picture-perfect young couple, but beneath the smiles and sweet nothings was a growing storm. Because unknown to Ethan, the woman he loved had fallen into the arms of someone else. Not a classmate, not a coworker, but his own grandfather. Robert Johnson, wealthy, powerful, respected, had become obsessed with Tiffany. And what started as innocent flirtation at a family gathering would spiral into a months-long descent into obsession, control, manipulation, and murder. By the time Ethan would uncover the horrifying truth, it would be too late. The betrayal had already set a deadly chain of events into motion, and on that quiet May afternoon, it all came to a bloody end. But how did this twisted triangle form in the first place? How did a young woman become entangled with a man 5 decades her senior? And what really happened behind closed doors in that cursed house? This is the story of a deadly obsession, of love turned poison, and of a family secret that ended in blood. It was just a family barbecue. Laughter echoed through the backyard. Kids chased fireflies. The grill sizzled. Tiffany Harper smiled politely, helping Ethan's grandmother bring out dishes to the patio. Everyone adored her. She was Ethan's longtime girlfriend. Smart, charming, effortlessly kind. But someone else was watching her that evening, watching too closely. Robert Johnson, Ethan's 76-year-old grandfather, sat quietly under the patio umbrella, a whiskey in hand. His gaze wasn't casual, it lingered, measured, predatory. At first, Tiffany chalked it up to nothing. Maybe she was imagining it, a weird glance, a compliment that hung too long in the air. But by the time she caught him watching her from across the yard, eyes scanning her every move, she felt a chill even in the summer heat. Robert was different from other old men. He was sharp, worldly. He spoke with confidence, his words laced with stories of business conquests, foreign trips, powerful friends. When he finally approached Tiffany that night, it wasn't to talk about the weather, it was to make her feel seen. "Ethan's lucky," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're not like the other girls." That comment, just one sentence, lodged itself in her mind. As summer days bled into July, Ethan grew busier with school and internships. Tiffany began stopping by the Johnson house more often, under the pretense of helping with family matters. Robert was always there, always ready to talk, always listening. What started as innocent became intimate. Shared drinks turned into shared secrets. She confided in him about her fears, her ambitions, her doubts about the future. Robert listened, and then he offered something more: attention, validation, and most dangerously, influence. He wasn't just Ethan's grandfather anymore. He became something else. A man who made her feel desired, a man who could change her life. But behind every compliment was a trap, and behind every smile was a plan. They met in secret, not once or twice, but often, at the family estate, in hidden corners of town, at motels under false names. Tiffany thought she had control, but she didn't see how carefully Robert was orchestrating everything. He didn't just want her affection. He wanted her loyalty, her silence, her soul. He began promising things that made her dizzy. "You're wasted with Ethan," he'd whisper. "I could give you a life most girls your age only dream of." And Tiffany, feeling invisible in her relationship, unsure of her path, started to believe him. But Robert's generosity came with strings, tight strings, and soon those strings became chains. He'd remind her of the influence he wielded, how he had friends in the dean's office, how he could make a call and ruin Ethan's future if she ever crossed him. What once felt like flattery began to feel like a noose tightening around her neck. Robert became increasingly possessive, jealous. He started tracking where she went, asking who she spoke to. He'd grow cold if she didn't respond quickly enough, and when she tried to pull away, he'd smile and say things like, "Don't forget who protects you and who can destroy you." Tiffany's world became small. Her lies became complex. Her fear became constant. She could no longer talk to Ethan without guilt dripping from her tongue. Every hug felt hollow, every kiss forced. But she kept it going, because walking away now might mean losing everything. Robert had her exactly where he wanted her, not in love, but under control. January rolled in cold and gray, but inside Tiffany Harper's mind, it was far colder. She had become a prisoner, but there were no locked doors, no guards, no alarms. Her cage was built from manipulation, blackmail, and whispered threats in the dead of night. Robert was no longer charming. He was demanding, unrelenting, controlling. Tiffany tried more than once to walk away, to reclaim the pieces of herself that she'd lost. But each time, Robert pulled her back, not with kindness, but with calculated terror. He knew what buttons to press. He reminded her what he knew, what he could do, how easily he could expose their affair and obliterate her life, and Ethan's. And so, she stayed. Each morning, she woke up with a pit in her stomach. Each message from Robert was a reminder that she was no longer her own. She was caught in something she couldn't undo. Her phone was never silent. Her thoughts were never safe. And Robert? He was watching her unravel and enjoying it. He tested her, pushed her boundaries, asked her to lie more, to skip time with Ethan, to prove her devotion. And when she hesitated just once, he showed her that his power wasn't just talk. Tiffany came home one evening to find a letter. It was unsigned, but the message was clear. "You belong to me. Don't forget." The pressure became unbearable. She cried herself to sleep, ate less, avoided friends. Her world was shrinking into a dark tunnel with no exit. But what she didn't know was that cracks were forming outside of her prison too. Because Ethan, sweet, trusting Ethan, had begun to notice. And what he would uncover would shake everything. Because betrayal this deep never stays buried for long. By March 2009, the silence between Tiffany and Ethan had grown too loud to ignore. What once was comfort had turned into distance. And for the first time since they met, Ethan couldn't recognize the woman who sat across from him at dinner. She avoided his gaze. She flinched at his touch. Her laughter, the one that used to light up a room, had disappeared. And when she wasn't drifting away in thought, she was leaving the house for hours on end, offering vague explanations that dissolved as soon as she said them. Ethan tried to be understanding. He told himself maybe she was stressed, maybe it was school, maybe she just needed space. But the truth was hard to ignore. There were patterns, changes, moments that didn't make sense. Her phone vibrated late at night. She'd snatch it quickly and hold it close. She started keeping it face down at all times. She took longer showers, shorter conversations. And when Ethan asked her where she'd been, the answers came too fast, or not at all. One night while Tiffany was showering, Ethan caught a glimpse of her phone screen. A message, no name, just a number. The words, same place, don't be late. It was enough to stop his heart. He didn't say anything that night, or the next, but something had changed inside him. A sense of betrayal began to bloom. It wasn't proof, Not yet, but it was intuition, and it whispered one word again and again: affair. Still, Ethan didn't want to believe it. Not Tiffany, not his grandfather, not his own blood. But doubt has a way of growing, of curling into every crevice of your mind. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan watched her closely, her movements, her excuses, her energy. All of it pointed to something deeper, something hidden. He stopped sleeping. He couldn't eat. His chest was tight every time she left the house. He would replay their conversations in his mind, searching for cracks, looking for slips, hunting for the truth in places where love used to live. And in that desperate search, he began to see it. Not just the affair, but who it was with. And the horror of what he was starting to believe was too much to face. April 10th, 2009. It was supposed to be a normal Friday. Ethan had finished his classes early and decided on a whim to surprise Tiffany. Maybe they could have dinner. Maybe they could talk. Maybe, just maybe, things could go back to the way they were. But fate had other plans. He pulled into the driveway just before sunset. The house was quiet, eerily so. No birdsong, no wind, just the hum of silence and the soft creak of wood as he stepped out of the car. That's when he noticed the front door, slightly ajar. Tiffany always locked the door. His chest tightened. He stepped inside. The air was thick, still. The way it gets right before a thunderstorm, only this storm wasn't outside. The hall was dark. Shadows clung to the walls. And from somewhere deeper in the house, he heard them. Voices, software muffled, but unmistakably intimate. He walked slowly, his footsteps nearly silent on the carpet, his breath shallow. And then he reached the living room. And what he saw there shattered his world into 1,000 jagged pieces. There in the dim light were Tiffany and Robert, together, entwined, hands touching, lips moving. A moment so tender, so intimate, it would have been beautiful if it weren't so horrifying. Ethan froze. His heart stopped. The scene before him was a grotesque parody of love. His girlfriend, his own grandfather, together, in his house. No one noticed him, not at first. Not until he stepped backward, hitting the wall with a dull thud. Tiffany's eyes shot toward him, wide with terror. Robert turned startled, but Ethan didn't wait. He ran, out the door, down the steps, into the car, his hands shaking, his mind spiraling. He didn't speak, didn't cry, didn't even scream. Because betrayal like that doesn't provoke sound. It provokes silence, the kind that burns. That night, Ethan drove. He didn't know where he was going. He just needed to leave. To escape the image now burned into his memory. The trust he once had been destroyed. Not by strangers, but by the two people he thought he knew best. And the worst part? He didn't just lose his girlfriend, he lost his family. In the weeks that followed Ethan's discovery, silence fell over the Johnson family like a thick, suffocating fog. Ethan never spoke to Tiffany again. He never called, never texted. He vanished from her world. But he wasn't the one she feared now. Because with Ethan gone, Robert believed the path was clear. No more secrets, no more hiding. In his mind, their affair could finally blossom into something permanent. He began calling Tiffany constantly, showing up at her apartment unannounced, leaving gifts on her doorstep, jewelry, flowers, notes written in an elegant, obsessive hand. He called it love, but Tiffany knew better. What once felt thrilling had turned into a slow-burning nightmare. The man who once whispered promises now barked demands. He told her to quit school, to move in with him, to forget Ethan completely. When she hesitated, he grew angry. "You think you have a choice," he'd hiss over the phone. "I gave you everything. You owe me." And the most chilling part? He wasn't bluffing. Robert began flexing his influence. Her landlord suddenly raised the rent. Her internship was canceled without explanation. Friends stopped returning her calls. Slowly, subtly, Robert was cutting her off from everything, leaving himself as the only thing she had left. He didn't have to shout. He didn't have to hit. His power was systemic, quiet, suffocating. Tiffany's mental state began to crumble. She stopped attending classes, stopped eating, slept with the lights on. Every shadow felt like Robert. Every knock at the door made her heart race. She had become a prisoner in a story she no longer controlled. But she wasn't invisible. Neighbors noticed the older man who came around too often. Friends whispered behind her back, and the weight of judgment pressed down harder each day. By early May, Tiffany had reached her limit. She stood in front of the mirror one night and didn't recognize the woman staring back. This wasn't escape anymore. It wasn't freedom. It was survival. And Robert? He would never let her go. May 18th, 2009. A date that would be etched into police reports, court transcripts, and the shattered memories of everyone involved. That morning, Tiffany Harper made a decision. She couldn't go on like this. Not another day, not another hour. She'd rehearsed the conversation 100 times. She'd tell him it was over, calmly, firmly. She'd explain that whatever they had, whatever illusion of love they were pretending to live in, was done, finished. She would take back her life. But the one thing Tiffany had never been able to predict was how Robert would respond. That afternoon, she drove to his house. Her hands trembled on the steering wheel. Her stomach turned. But she forced herself out of the car, up the steps, and into the home that had once felt almost glamorous, now suffocating. Robert greeted her with his usual smug smile. "I knew you'd come back," he said. Tiffany took a deep breath. "No," she replied. "I came to say goodbye." At first, Robert laughed, but when he realized she meant it, really meant it, his demeanor changed. The mask slipped. The man who once seduced with confidence now exploded in rage. His voice rose, his hands clenched. He accused her of betrayal, of using him, of playing with his heart. He reminded her, coldly, cruelly, of what he still held over her. "I'll ruin you," he growled. "I'll tell everyone. You'll be the whore who slept with a 76-year-old man to climb the social ladder." Tiffany stood her ground, but inside her fear was building. He stepped closer. She backed away. His voice thundered through the kitchen. And then he reached for her wrist. And that's when she saw it. The knife on the counter, gleaming in the afternoon light. Her heart pounded. Her breath came in gasps. The walls were closing in. The months of abuse, manipulation, emotional torture. It all boiled over in one final moment of panic. Her hand moved on instinct. The blade sank into flesh. One stab, then two, then more. Robert's threats turned to gurgles. His strength faded. He collapsed to the tile floor, blood pooling fast beneath him. Tiffany dropped the knife, stared, frozen. The house was silent again, but not peaceful. Not anymore. She had broken free, but the price of freedom was blood. He went back to his grandfather's house, back to the place where everything unraveled. Some part of him hoped there might still be a thread left to mend. Something human, something normal, something less horrifying than what he'd seen. But what he found was far worse. As he stepped inside, the air felt heavy, unnaturally still. The faint scent of dried blood lingered in the hallway. And then, in the kitchen, he saw it. A pool of red, sticky, dark, dried around the edges. And in the center, crumpled like a broken marionette, was Robert Johnson, face pale, eyes glassy, a knife still lodged in his chest. Ethan couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The betrayal he thought he had already endured now had a body, a final, irreversible ending. He called 911. Police arrived within minutes. The house became a crime scene. Yellow tape, gloves, cameras, blood swabbed, knives bagged, notes scribbled on clipboards. It was no accident, no intruder. This was personal. The detectives worked fast. Robert Johnson was no ordinary man. His wealth, his reputation, his political connections, his sudden, violent death stirred attention far beyond the sleepy Ohio town. And Tiffany? It didn't take long for suspicion to fall on her. At first, she denied everything. She hadn't been at the house. She hadn't seen Robert in days. But her voice shook. Her timeline didn't match, and her alibi, full of holes. Worse yet, her fingerprints were on the knife. Surveillance footage from a neighbor's driveway showed her car pulling up to Robert's house the very day he died. The evidence wasn't just circumstantial, it was damning. By early June, Tiffany Harper was arrested and charged with second-degree murder. News spread fast. The media feasted. A beautiful young woman, a powerful older man, a scandalous affair that ended in blood. To some, she was a manipulator, a cold-blooded killer. To others, she was a victim, trapped in a relationship she never asked for. But no matter which side you stood on, one truth remained. A man was dead, and a secret had exploded into something neither of them could control. Reporters, spectators, former classmates, curious neighbors, everyone wanted to witness the climax of a story that had captivated the nation. Tiffany Harper, once just another college girl in love, now set on trial for murder. The prosecution wasted no time painting their version of her, a manipulative young woman, a seductress who used her youth to exploit an old man's wealth. And when the affair turned inconvenient, she killed him. They pointed to the evidence, her fingerprints on the knife, the surveillance footage, the timeline of lies. They even introduced text messages, flirtatious, damning, between Tiffany and Robert, laying bare months of secret rendezvous. Their theory? Tiffany seduced Robert, enjoyed the money and attention. But when things got serious, and when Ethan found out, she panicked. So she silenced the problem, permanently. But the defense told a different story. They painted Tiffany not as a cold-blooded killer, but as a victim. A young woman groomed and manipulated by a powerful, wealthy man who used his influence to isolate, control, and dominate her. They called it what it was: coercion, emotional abuse, psychological imprisonment. They showed the jury emails, notes, recordings, and most chillingly, journal entries from Tiffany herself. Pages filled with fear, regret, paranoia. Phrases like, "He won't let me go. I think I'm going crazy. If I leave, he said he'll destroy me." The defense argued she didn't premeditate murder. She acted in self-defense, cornered, broken, terrified. The jury deliberated for days, and on August 25th, the verdict came in: guilty, but not of premeditated murder. Tiffany Harper was convicted of second-degree murder, acknowledging that while the act was intentional, it wasn't calculated. It was driven by emotional distress and desperation. Her sentence, 25 years in prison, a lifetime lost, a legacy destroyed, and a town left in ruins. It ended in scars, unseen but permanent. Ethan never returned to the family home. He moved across the country, trying to rebuild a life from ashes. But the betrayal, by the woman he loved and the man who raised him, would haunt him forever. Tiffany would spend her 20s and 30s behind bars. The girl who once dreamed of graduation, of starting a family, of building a future, would now live out her youth in a concrete cage, replaying the nightmare over and over again. And Robert? He was buried in a closed-casket funeral, with whispered apologies and even louder rumors following him to the grave. But the real tragedy here isn't just the bloodshed. It's the power, how it can be used to manipulate, control, and destroy. It's the silence, how victims often feel trapped by fear, unable to speak until it's too late. And it's the illusion that monsters always look like monsters. Because sometimes they wear expensive suits, they sit at the family table, and they smile like someone you're supposed to trust. So let this story be a warning. Pay attention to what hides beneath charm. Listen to the ones who grow quiet in a crowd, and never underestimate how far a secret can spiral, because not all love is love, and not all families are safe.